So we are here to talk about blockchain, and I've heard several of you stop me and say, oh good, I hope you can explain to me what blockchain is. It is a word that is ubiquitous yet incredibly poorly understood, and even worse, it is also often misunderstood. For many, it is synonymous with Bitcoin, or it's synonymous with some kind of crazy currency speculation. It doesn't help that some startups, with ill-conceived startups that don't really have any kind of, don't really know what they are, will slap blockchain on their proposal to VCs to try to look cutting edge and cool. And as a result, there's more than a little eye rolling about blockchain on media Twitter. I'm sure you've all seen it. But the fact is, and what we're going to talk about today, is that blockchain offers some really incredibly compelling solutions for journalism. I'm sorry to say that a get-rich-quick scheme is not one of them. In case you were wondering whether this is the way to get rich in journalism, I'm sorry, there is no way to get rich in journalism. So if that was your goal, feel free to enjoy the sunshine. Blockchain might be able to solve some really intractable issues that we're facing. We're going to talk today about what's possible, where there are limitations, where there are certainly plenty of barriers. One thing that you will notice about this panel is not one of us is a technologist. You're the closest we have to a technologist. This is not going to be a technical conversation, and it doesn't need to be a technical conversation. You don't need to understand how blockchain works any more than you need to understand how the internet works, any more than you need to understand how moving pictures get into the box that is called your television. What you need to understand is what you can do with it. So that's what we're going to be talking about. This is not a tech conversation. But what I love about this panel in particular is that each one of you in your own way is someone that looks around corners, can see around corners, and finds solution in technology. Maria was like, wait, why am I on this panel? I can't explain blockchain. I said, your organization is one of the savviest and most innovative in technology I know. So let me introduce the panelists. At the end is Mark Little, who probably many of you know. He was the founder of Storyful, which is one of the most important tools for journalism in the public out there. He also had various executive roles at Twitter, and now is the founder of a really cool company and product, which I assume is going to be a set of products, called Kinzen. Next to Mark is someone I'm sure I do not need to introduce, but I will anyway, which is Maria Ressa, who is the founder and the head of Rappler in the Philippines. Maria is a longtime journalist. We were colleagues together in different parts of the world at CNN a million years ago. She is also on the Civil Council, which I'll explain what that is. And then finally, Mattias, I should have asked how to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry. Who's managing editor of Svenska Yle in Sweden. He's a long track record in tech journalism. And he was recently a visiting fellow at POLIS at the London School of Economics, where he researched and then delivered a report called What Use is Blockchain for Journalism? So as you might imagine, we're going to start with you so you can give us a little bit of a grounding, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. The whole name is Mattias Erkkila.
Thank you. Mattias Erkkila.
Oh. Okay. How it works. Good. Thanks. Erkkila is the name. So if you wondered, yeah, I actually work for the Finnish public service media company. The language is correct. It's a Swedish-speaking, minority-serving part of the Wiley. And as Vivian said, I was visiting research fellow at the London School of Economics, POLIS, the journalism think tank, in October 2018. Studying, it's all written here, so you can read it as well. Studying what blockchain could offer journalists and media companies. And the report I wrote is published at the moment. It's on the LSE website. You find it with what uses blockchain for journalism, if you look it up. Please read and comment. You'll find my email here. And you'll find it also easily. Yeah, it should be on the report as well, of course. So now I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes to actually go through the usual use cases. I'm not going to go through blockchain as a technology. I'm just going to go through the use cases I met when I was talking to people who were actually thinking about using blockchain in media or journalist environments. And there are 4 typical ones. I'd say I grouped in 4 categories. The first one is saving and publishing content metadata. This was the most usual one that sort of came across when I talked to the companies doing this. And if we would save content meta, as Civil is doing, I suppose, on a blockchain, it gives us a open and immutable record of content origin and the editing history. And that, of course, can function as we can counter false content with that. It proves the original content. And also, I hope it would open the journalistic process to the public and maybe increase trustworthiness. Number 2, all the startups I talk with were working on a product combining user participation, some kind of professional public production, and often personalization, machine learning or something like that. And if you want to do user participation on a platform, you need to have identity management and event logging and maybe also contract management, and that can be done with blockchain, of course. Number 3, this is the most typical, the most usual, most successful use of blockchain, I'd say. You all know Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. The same technology, the same solution can be used to actually fund your activity, your company, your startup, by if you release your own cryptocurrency. It's called initial coin offering. I think Civil has done also that. And if you actually succeed to sell those coins to someone, you get money to actually fund your activity. And on top of that, you'll get a local cryptocurrency, crypto economy that you can use to then support the journalism, the newsrooms, and also use for user gratification. Let's say 1 comment, 1 coin, as an example. And then the 4th one, this goes slightly to the, the more visionary, vague part of blockchain thoughts. I don't actually think that somebody is doing this at the moment. But if, let's say, if we would run a publishing environment on Ethereum, it would be very censorship resistant, since you can't just take out all the nodes just all at once. So these are the use cases that I came across in October. There might be several more at the moment out there already. The interesting thing, slightly disappointing thing, was that then when I was looking at the success stories, the actual use cases, what is happening in the reality, it looked like this. I would have liked to write much more on this slide, but I had really hard time to find people who were using blockchain in production and making a success of it. All the startups I've met, well, they were using blockchain in a very minor role. They were talking that, yeah, we're actually descaling the investment in blockchain at the moment. And then some people who follow, those of you who follow the scene know, of course, that Civil's token sale failed in October. Maybe we heard more about that later. You relaunched in March, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And you can, if you remember, there was lots and lots of expectations and hype built up in 2017, 2018, until ONA conference, ONA conference in Austin. I suppose I wasn't there, but I understood that Amy Webb pushed really hard for blockchain as savior for journalism. So this was a surprise to actually notice that there wasn't anything happening, anything real, and it was also a disappointment from my point of view. But I hope there's people on the panel who can enlighten me here. Is this the end of the story for blockchain in media? No, I don't suppose so. Most of you probably have noticed this, at least. Facebook, Telegram, and Signal are all working on some kind of cryptocurrency solution. Maybe blockchain-based or not, but this can be, as you can imagine, really, really big things, of course. But here, I'll finish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for setting us up with that. And you make a very good point, which is Blockchain, it's hard to find living examples of blockchain in the wild. There are many reasons for it. I would say primarily one of the main reasons is it's still very early days. So those of us who are in blockchain now are really, we're experimenting, and we're trying to find when it comes to journalism, at least my motivation for being part of Civil is blockchain is with us. It's with us in a very nascent way right now. It's going to be with us in a much bigger way in the years to come, in the decades to come. And why not be there at the beginning to try to make sure that blockchain can be used to support ethical journalism, as opposed to sort of leave it to others to find ways for it to be gained. To that end, the next thing I want to do is just talk briefly about two nascent examples of blockchain in the wild. One is my own, it's not my organization, but the organization that I'm part of, which is Civil. So I'm as the moderator, I'm going to just sort of step back and be a little bit of a presenter. But then I also, Jeff Coyne, who's sitting in the front row, is the founder of an organization called Pressland, which is also a blockchain-based organization. He's just going to stand up and just talk 2 minutes. So just so that you know what two examples of actual blockchain applications to journalism are, and then we're going to go into an example. And this is where I need somebody to help me be able to I don't know what happened to my attachment to be able to show my slides. If there's somebody that can help me. Yes, you can get it. In fact, you should talk while, is there somebody that can help me with be able to show my slides? Sorry.
They're doing it.
Oh, they're doing, okay.
But it's not connected.
No, I'm not connected, yeah. Sorry. But in the meantime, Jeff, why don't you go first? Here, you can just use this.
I'll entertain the crowd while the techies take care of things. Thanks, Vivian. It's a great panel. I'm honored to be able to make a cameo and be the filler during the tech session of the panel.
Here you go.
I'm a career journalist like most people in the room, and I'm horrified by the erosion of public trust like everybody else. It is an emergency, has been mentioned at the conference before. My company, Pressland, believes that radical transparency is going to be a key component to recapturing the public trust. And what we're doing is we're mapping the media as a supply chain, the production data of journalism. The metadata, it's sort of like what the Trust Project is doing, but at scale and dynamically and sort of on steroids. Everything about an article, down to the article level, everything about that writer that's professionally relevant, the editor, ideally everybody who touched that article along the way, much like you track the source of your food from the farm to the table. And if something goes wrong in that food chain, you could track it back. And we say something's going wrong in media right now. Where blockchain comes into play is in the storage level. It's what Mattias said. We're sort of in the first use case of it. In a certain way, I think blockchain hasn't failed, but in some ways it's normalized already a little bit. What we say is blockchain is sort of the least interesting thing of what we're doing. We have a collection, analysis, storage, and distribution. The storage level for blockchain for us is a technological decision because supply chain storage and blockchain turns out to be a very good match for reasons nobody wants to go into right now. But it's also an ethical decision. By putting our data on a permission chain, we're signaling that we don't own this data. We're custodians of this data. We're not a Cision. We're not, Meltwater. We're not putting everybody's, the data of your journalism behind a wall and keeping it to ourselves. We're custodians of it because blockchain is distributed. There's no central owner to this network of data. And when we get publishers to come in and give us their production data right into our system so that we can organize it in a taxonomy that's useful for everybody else, they will get their own keys. They will own that data. And blockchain is immutable. You can't go back and erase your history because that's what it is. It's a chain of records. So if you've revised something, you're welcome to revise your data, but the history of where you came from is still going to be there. And our end goal is to kick this data out to the media trust business, the NewsGuards of the world, platform solutions, and help them make better decisions, whether it's human curated or algorithmic. We think that everybody needs this vast, an immense set of data and layer this data into their decisions. However they're assigning trust, we want to help them. We're not in the trust assignment business. We want to support everybody else that is. And again, by using blockchain, really just as a very interesting, very useful storage component, We're telling everybody how we intend to manage this data as curators, not owners.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I think he makes Jeff makes an important point, which is for press land, for civil, and for others that are getting into the space, the point is not blockchain. The point is that the blockchain provides some technology solutions to the problems of journalism. So I'm just going to do a quick, short explanation of civil. It's one of those things where I can try to explain it in 1 minute, but really, ideally, I take much longer than that. So just if there's any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer. Look, everything that we've been talking about the last 4 days is around these issues that you see on the screen. Public trust at an all-time low, failing press freedom, collapsing business models, and platforms controlling a large part of the distribution in data. So these are the problems that we look at when thinking about what solutions blockchain can offer, and which was the motivation to create Civil. Now, let me just be perfectly clear. Civil is not going to instantaneously or even in the long term solve all these problems. Civil is providing some solutions to some parts of these problems. We are all in this for the long haul, and so we think that there are some things that we can offer. So what is Civil? It is a community-owned platform that is controlled only by ethical, and I'll explain what that means in a second, news organizations and the public they serve. It is a cooperative. There's no boss. I don't run Civil. The founder doesn't run Civil. No company owns Civil. People own Civil. People, it's the journalists and the public they serve, with no other intermediary. The one commonality to the news organizations that are on Civil gets at the definition of ethical, which is we have a document called the Civil Constitution. It's online. You can see it. It's been through multiple revisions. It will no doubt be revised again at a later date. The Civil Constitution would probably, if you read it, it lays out the standards and practices and ethics that are expected of any news organization that is part of Civil. I have a feeling all of you being journalists, if you read it, you'd be like, yeah, of course, this is journalism. So there's nothing in there that it should be particularly shocking to anyone, but what it does do is it defines a certain threshold for journalism ethics, which means that anybody on the Civil platform, if you're on the Civil platform and explained how you could be kept out, it means that you're not an InfoWars, you're not a state-run news organization, or you're not even something very benign like a sleep blog run by a mattress company. That's a wink at you, Jeff, who used to work for Casper. So nothing wrong with it, perfectly fine, but it's not journalism. So, so the way that it works is, how does the self-governance work? So the people, again, it is cooperatively managed. The mechanism to manage the governance of the network is a piece of cryptocurrency called a Civil token. It is not Bitcoin, it is a new cryptocurrency, and which is just a piece of software. And that token, that Civil token, serves two purposes. Its primary purposes is it's a voting mechanism. It represents your share of the say on the network. It's also a currency that you that can be exchanged, that represents a value exchange. But the way that Civil works in terms of these tokens is news organizations have tokens. They can either buy them, or what we're doing is we're giving a lot of tokens away to news organizations to bring them onto the platform. Regular people can buy membership in Civil. We call it membership. It allows you, it comes with an equal amount of tokens. So you have the public, you have news organizations, and those tokens represent the way that you can govern the network to keep bad actors off, and soon also to use those tokens to reward positive behavior. So, for example, well, I'll explain that more in a minute. So, Civil is live. This is just a look at our registry. This is just a screen grab I took this morning. You'll see it says approved newsrooms. It scrolls down to other newsrooms, but you can see 3 across the top. We're mostly focusing right now on small independent news organizations that are either covering local areas or covering specific topics. As you can see from these are all excellent news organizations. So they have submitted their application. They have not, over a 14-day period, they have not been challenged, so they're now on the Civil network. These are new applications that have come in the last week. You can just see these 3. Again, you scroll down, you see more, but one is Greylock Glass, which is about, which is a hyper-local news organization. The 9, this is about women's sports. Cubicle, which is in Spanish. So we're mostly focused on English and Spanish newsrooms. So there's a whole bunch more around them. So it says awaiting approval. What does that mean? It means that they submit they write out an application. Anybody in the public can see that application. They say, this is our mission statement. These are the sources of our revenue. This is what we cover. These are, and a couple of other simple questions. Anyone can read that charter. And if they look at that charter and they look at that news organization and they feel that there is something that they're doing that is in violation of the Constitution, they can be challenged. And in fact, we've had our first challenge. So this news organization, MMVII, which is basically 2008 in Roman numerals, it is a blockchain news site. It has been challenged by somebody in the public, which they do by staking a certain amount of tokens. That triggers a vote. And people in the community have felt that there's some aspects of what they're doing that do not meet the Constitution. There is now a very active dialogue going on in the comment section, and then anyone with tokens can use those tokens to vote. 1 token, 1 vote. If the challenger prevails, then this news organization will not be allowed to stay on the platform. If the newsroom prevails, then they stay on until such time as there may be another challenge or not. Now, because we know that things around voting, and especially around 1 token, 1 vote, some things can go wrong. We have various levels, layers of appeal. So if 2008 does not win their challenge, and they feel that some aspect of it was unfair, they can appeal that to something called the Civil Council, which Maria is a part, and 9 other, there's 9 of us who are journalists, academic, free speech experts, etc. The council will review it. They will either uphold the decision of the community, in which case that's the end of the line, or they will overturn the decision of the community, which would be unusual, but it's an important check and balance. But even there, the community can overturn the decision of the council by 2/3 majority. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different ways to try to protect for fairness. So we have over 100 newsrooms who are either in the process of applying or have applied. These are just a handful, particularly some of the global ones. I picked some news organizations, that I know are represented here at Perugia. And there's a lot more to civil. There's a lot more benefit. A lot of the things that Mattias talked about, including being able to archive permanently your content to the blockchain and several others. But we will get into that later, because I want to turn this now back over to the panelists. So, okay, Mark, I'm going to go to you next, and then I'm saving you for last, Maria. So talk about, you were actually an early, you were a pretty early cheerleader for blockchain. And given your experience with Storyful and verifying content, I think that's a lot of the root of where you saw that potential. So talk to us a little bit about that.
It goes back to the point you made about looking around corners in the news business. One of the key principles I think that there you go. It's technology. It'll never catch on. So one of the things I do, and when I was assessing, news innovation, it was a point you made earlier, but looking around corners, was a criteria is this, that if you look at something and you know how it's going to work in practice, but it doesn't work in theory, it's pretty good, right? Because what generally happens with innovation is, if you get a gut feeling, a holy shit moment, you say, that solves a problem I know exists. But currently, there's no way of describing in theory how it works, right? And people find it very hard to find comparisons, and that's why every startup is going to be the Uber of something, because they're trying to find ways to relate something that seems like science fiction to reality. And for me, the moments were 2 things. First of all, I realized in choosing to set up a new business, one thing I was guided by was the failure of a business model for journalism based on scale of numbers of people who come to your platform. That the next model of journalism would all be about the depth of engagement with individuals in your community. And for me, when I looked at what Civil was trying to do, and this is my introduction in the early days, was this radical decentralization down to a set of tools that were essentially going to allow people to directly relate to more local, independent, and niche publishers, which was the second thing that I was looking at, is what I think is an unfolding explosion of smaller newsrooms that do a way better job at representing communities, and Civil just looked like it was purpose-built. And then when I looked into the technology and started understanding a bit more about blockchain, I had that aha moment that I could actually put myself back to about 2013, when the Arab Spring was reaching a really murderous kind of crescendo in Syria. And there was a group of curators, and I don't know a better word to describe them. When I worked with Storyful, we would find people who were the wisdom in the crowd, right? The tiny 0.1% of all social media users who know something about something or a place. And so Google at the time, very far-sighted of them, sponsored us to create a Google Plus, if you remember that, group, which essentially
dearly
was just,
departed.
but it was great. The way it worked was we would invite people who we felt knew something, let's say about Russian munitions in Syria. They'd be the people who look at the tail fin of the photograph that we found and say, yep, manufactured in this date. And you know, there were some people like a guy called Elliot Higgins, who we all now know as Bellingcat, emerged at this time through this group. But we had no way of really regulating, governing the way that the curators came into the group. We had no way really of establishing who they were, their background. We had no real way of doing anything to incentivize or monetize their activities. And so for me, when I looked at blockchain, I said, if we went back and did that group again, we would amplify exponentially the power of curation from those kinds of people. And so that for me was what was really important. The second part was, I realized in 2009, the light bulb moment that made me leave a career as a foreign correspondent to become an internet entrepreneur was the Green Revolution in Iran in 2009. If you remember, the rebellion against this protested election result. And when we were curating, we were creating incredible content, but it was disappearing off the internet, partly politically motivated. And it was a pattern repeated in Tahrir Square, Syria, again and again, Kiev. We just watched as the internet, the archive of now, the most amazing way we were getting vivid testimony from eyewitnesses was just disappearing. And no one knew why, and I think a lot of it is politically motivated. These platforms are now weaponized against democracy. And I could see how blockchain and the immutability we heard about earlier on would make sure that couldn't happen. And not just preserve the videos or the eyewitness content, but the annotations, the tagging, the verification, the curation, all in a place that would be preserved for my kids' generation and their kids' generation, rather than the first wave of the internet that didn't give a shit about anything but growth. And so for me, that was just those powerful moments. And repeatedly they happen. Again, works in practice. Doesn't really work in theory at the moment, but it will.
Maria, one of the things, I have a two-part question for you. So the first is when we've been talking about Civil, and I asked you what part of it seemed, and not just Civil, but anyway, what the opportunities around blockchain. I really am not intending to make this into a commercial for Civil. The thing that struck you the most, and I'd love to elaborate it, is you said is the notion of blockchain enabling a community of trust. And that there is a community in the case of Civil, and this would be the case with other blockchain-based organizations, that we'd be creating a network of news organizations that can be trusted, and it is a community upon which various collaborations can happen. And you talked about one of the things that you're most excited about is looking across this network and figure out what kind of collaborative journalism we might be able to do together. So I'll have another question for you, but I'll let you talk about that.
So, where do I begin? Can I make 3 quick points why we went into why blockchain you have to look at it. The first was distribution is in the social media platforms, right? And we were building communities of action. So one of the things we tried to do is how do we bring them onto Rappler? And so we tried to create, maybe 3-4 years ago, I said, let's do Medium on Rappler. Yeah, Medium took a lot of money and a long time to build, right? And it's still. So we did do a blogging platform on Rappler. And one of the basic questions is how do you make sure that identity, how do you make sure that the people you are bringing on are who they say they are? So that was kind of my first brush. We've since taken this down because after social media was weaponized, I think government began seeding stuff onto X. We called it X on Rappler. So that was the first, was verification, identity verification. The second one was, given all the legal problems that we were now facing, how do I make sure that we can keep our content even if Rappler no longer exists? How do I make sure that we are not erased off the face of the earth? We won't be, don't worry, we have a solution. If you're government, you're not listening. And then the third, I think, was, and I'll go through the ups and downs of it, one of our investors wrote 2 pages, one company that he was involved in, he's Filipino, wrote 2 pages and raised $31 million on the blockchain, on a blockchain idea. And this is the wild side of it, right?
Yeah.
He actually did raise the money. Rappler we raised $2 million to create Rappler. So all of a sudden, we were like thinking maybe two years ago, before all of this, how do we do this in a country which has no laws about it, in a country where they can run after you? Then Vivian came along. And I was like, how do we explore blockchain without having all of the infrastructure in our country? Then when we started working together, the parts we were doing is very familiar. It was like we were back at CNN and we were talking about standards and ethics, right? And then we began to look at, if you can get the technicals of it, and like Mark said, you have to actually get the technology to do this for you. Building communities of action globally actually could work. And you can bypass all of the laws of countries all around the world because it is transparent, the same way cryptocurrency can do that without it. So that's a long-winded way of saying this is why I continue to look at it, why I work with civil. I think that there is tremendous value in it, and we need to continue hammering at it until we can find out exactly what we can do with it.
Fantastic. So across your comments, we've talked about some of the attributes of blockchain that can be useful to journalism. We've talked about the archiving content to the internet, so that it cannot be taken if your server's taken down or if your server just goes down. I heard a horror story from a news organization, a very well-respected news organization in the U.S. online only, that said when they switched to CMSs, they lost 2 years of their archive, which is just like mind-blowingly heartbreaking. So to protect content, verification, trusted communities, decentralization, these are all some of the attributes that seem like they begin to form some solutions for some of the problems of journalism. And yet, and I'm going to throw it back to you, Mattias, which is what's the problem? What in your studies, why you were looking for, well, why isn't it out there? And what's going wrong? Why is this adoption slow?
A difficult question.
I'm hoping you can tell me, because I want to know.
Actually, if I can answer with a question,
Sure.
I sort of a thought that came when I was writing was that for me the question really was that why was the discussion about blockchain instead of all the problems and the actual things we wanted to do? Since then, and this is very typical, we have things we want to do, we know exactly what to do, engage with users, build communities, trust, so forth. Be open, transparent. All this is very clear for all of us, I suppose. But then we start to talk about blockchain for some reason, and then we are inside the Bitcoin sphere, which is not something that you actually want to be at the moment. It's a problem, really.
I agree.
I think you have suffered from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my question is, to answer with a question, that why do we have to talk about blockchain? This
do we have to talk about blockchain?
Maybe the panel is over. I don't know.
That is a great way of posing what I think is the blindingly obvious issue, which is it's like artificial intelligence, and you were saying earlier on, every startup has this startup bingo. I'm an AI-driven blockchain adopt. And part of it is that AI is just such a ridiculous term because it describes so many exciting modules that if we got to understand it a bit better, we would start breaking them up into pieces that would feel relevant to us. Like blockchain is, okay, a currency. That's really not that interesting to me. It's a smart contract. That's much more interesting because it starts getting back to like the journalistic codes of conduct that I signed on to when I was 21 when I became a journalist. Breaking down token economics literally is a token of esteem, right? It's just, I'm giving you something because you're doing something valuable in the community of action. And I love your phrase, community of action. Yeah. If we talked about a community of action, rather than the rather nerdy, geeky way that we describe these blockchain terms. And I could start throwing out terms about gas, and I don't understand those things.
No, I know. Yeah.
And if our language started to evolve a little bit more to try to break up these elements, like a smart contract is just a way of saying this is how we do things. A token is literally saying you do something of value to this community, we give you something. And then you start opening up issues around things like micropayments, which get really exciting because they are individual transactions. So I think that is a great question, and maybe we do, like we did when misinformation crisis happened, and we activists were saying, don't use the F word, because that's been weaponized by people like Trump. Use misinformation. Maybe we should say stop using blockchain and start breaking it down to the pieces that mean something in people's lives and have utility. So maybe we need to rewrite the kind of taxonomy. Yeah. Dare I use a phrase that's so.
Well, I mean, organizations don't say I'm on the internet. I mean, now it just becomes, it's sort of just, well, of course you are. And I think blockchain, at some point in the future, will fade into the background, and just the attributes of it, like you said, and and yes. The blockchain industry is really jargon heavy. You have no idea. I mean, I'm constantly in meetings going like, jargon alert, no. Don't talk about fiat. Nobody knows what fiat means. It's just regular money. So I want to I'm going to start to integrate my questions with questions from the audience, because we've sort of jumped around. We're bubbling up a big topic. So I think there's going to be microphones floating around. Maria, I think you wanted to say something. Please.
So I will go back a little bit and push back on Mark. I do think we need to talk blockchain, only because the technology. So I think the people who did the technology don't understand journalism. This is just like Facebook and Google, and the people who understand the tech don't understand what we want to do with it. And the people who want to do something with it don't understand the tech. Sorry.
Exactly,
I mean,
right.
that's, and so I think that's the exploration that we're going through, and we've worked through this. But I think, so the re-envisioning of the world is, if whoever, if the social media platforms had actually demanded identity, right? Because they were the ones who had the power to do that. And that was made transparent. Imagine if the blue check actually meant that you were truly verified. Yeah. That's kind of, so the use of it, and I've spent a lot of time trying to understand blockchain also, and I understand the bits and pieces of it, but I don't understand how to make it into the technology we want it. Civil is the closest that I've seen. And you're right, bits and pieces, we can take it apart, but I can't find anyone who can build the things that I want to do with it.
So that's a big challenge out to all of you.
But I think it's a good thing to compare it against. You just say Twitter verified tick, and knowing how Twitter does that, if you compare what we could do with a much more rigorous trust machine to establish that's transparent, that we know it's in the black box, it's actually an open box for us all. And I think Twitter has grappled with this about verification, but the same as well as Wikipedia, the same as Reddit, any platform that is essentially using the value of a tiny minority to do great value for the rest of the community. And I think if we make those comparisons, they start to become meaningful. So I think you're right in that sense. Let's look how they do it now and see how bad it is, and then show exactly how it could change if we were to establish, and whatever the word will be. But let's just stick with the one we have at the moment, I suppose.
Okay, questions. There must be questions. Here we go.
Thank you for the good panel.
Yes, please identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Roberto Reale. I am, let's say, a freelance journalist, and I work also in technology as a consultant for the government. It's a very, very great, I think, example of using and applying the blockchain, not, of course, on a technical, just on a technical, let's say, viewpoint, but also building something on top of it. But what do you think about using blockchain for whistleblowing? I mean, whistleblowing.
Whistleblowers. Yeah, sorry. Whistleblowers. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, not for delivering or disseminating news or contents, but just in order to, let's say, store contents somewhere without disclosing it, but with the possibility of disclosing it in the future, if the need arises, of course. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just like to mention maybe that most of these things actually cut both ways. I mean, whistleblowing, there's the identity management is quite, and then it cannot be open and distributed. It has to be closed and private. It's not quite clear. It's a good thing to have a global identity system, but not all identities should be there. Maybe.
Right. Although blockchain does enable identity alongside anonymity. In other words, because this is something that we've talked about and is very important in journalism beyond just whistleblowers, it's for reporters operating in difficult parts of the world. So you can have a persistent identity that travels with you so that you are known to be the same person, wherever you go in each instance, but without actually having your name revealed. So that would be the use case there. Questions? Challenges? Arguments? Come on.
Can I toss one?
Yeah.
So the other thing that is exciting about this point in time is, do you guys remember dial-up? I mean, when the internet was dial-up, I was 102.374.55 at CompuServe.com. You remember? This is the way blockchain feels right now. Like, we still have to figure out what we do with it, how to make it accessible, going through all of the things that we went through in civil just to get the tokens, going through all of this stuff to simplify. Again, I think there's potential, and I've seen both good and bad in terms of people saying, well, is it really truly secure? Well, is there anything else that you can show that will do better than what this is right now? I guess that's part of the reason why I think it's important to look at.
Yeah, and I think in some of the complicating factors you're talking about will solve over time, because in order for blockchain-based businesses to be useful to consumers, there's a lot of simplification that needs to happen. And the more people that are on these platforms, the more there will be a marketplace for technologists to make simple solutions. So right now, like, just to even buy tokens, to buy anything is complicated. It's more complicated than we want it to be, but it's getting easier, and all of these things will get easier over time and make them more consumer friendly. So there's a sort of there's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue with a lot of that technology. Questions? Here we go.
Hi, I'm Sanshya. I'm a journalist from Delhi. So I want to know if Civil is doing something to manage the fluctuation in prices of tokens, or if they have some innovative approach towards it, because that's usually been a concern with other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So if there's something in addition to that,
the tokens, so there's 34 million tokens that are being sold by the Civil Media Company. It's at a fixed price that goes up between now and when all the 34 million are sold. The price will rise. It started at 20. It will rise up to 20 cents, 20 U.S. cents, U.S. currency. The last tokens will be sold for 90 cents U.S. currency. So and the idea is that the more people buy them, the more the more valuable. Yeah, right. So we're actually now we've passed the first tier. I think now Civil tokens they're now 25 cents. People can buy them and sell them on the open market as well. So I mean, the price can go up and down just like any currency. However, one of the things that we're taking excruciating care with is to make sure that people understand what Civil is before they spend their money. In fact, we make them take a quiz, which is really annoying to some people, but it has questions like, do you think you're going to make a lot of money by buying Civil tokens? It's not your main purpose. That's not the exact wording, but things like that. And if they are, we really try to discourage them from coming in. Because we do not want Civil, sure, if the token price that goes up, that's great. But the purpose of Civil is not this, that somebody's going to buy tokens early and become incredibly rich. The purpose is this community governance. So it's important that the value is there. We certainly don't want the value to drop, but we're doing whatever we can to honestly kind of thwart like shooting prices, because that would be damaging to Civil in the long term.
Could I just say also, and not to big up Civil again, I know this is not that panel for it, but one of the things that excites me most as well is the sustainability of journalism that arises from the potential monetization of the newsroom network that is on Civil. So what I think Civil's done a good job with, a lot of other third parties, is helping these newsrooms understand that how they might be building monetizable newsletters on the basis of the communities they're gathering. Also acquiring value from being on the blockchain, having these tokens for the long term, potentially avoids what is the biggest obstacle that any media startup faces, is how do you get fundraising that is not rocket fuel, is expecting it to take off and have a hockey stick after year 2. And I think what's happening with these newsrooms, and give an example, the Colorado Sun, a bunch of journalists who objected to the way that their paper was being run by a certain hedge fund decided to found something new. And I think that's why, for me, what's really exciting is potentially seeing the Civil network as the first example of how blockchain can support the long-term sustainability of a business model based on connection to communities of action, and that's one of the things that inspires me. I have running for another panel. Just wanted to say my early departure is not in any way lack of promotion. But
yes, I should have warned everybody ahead of time that you needed to get going. He's got to be on another panel completely on the other side of town. Anyway, any questions? Any more questions?
If not, can I expand slightly?
Please.
If I just said something like that, if when we talk about journalism, we shouldn't talk about blockchain. And in the same way, if we talk about the future of internet, we shouldn't neither talk about blockchain. I think, if you know what for me was very interesting is to actually stumble on the Web 3.0 discussions. That sort of builds on the blockchain vision thing, decentralization, distribution, and goes several steps further, and that's also like beyond blockchain, and that from that point also blockchain is limiting the vision from my point of view. Thanks.
Questions? Everybody wants to get outside. I don't blame you. Yes. Oh, it's right behind you. Yeah.
Token give access to in Civil, for example? Do they give access to contents? So what's the relationship between the community and the newsrooms, and what the newsrooms get from it?
Yes. Oh,
exactly.
I'm happy to answer that. Sorry, I keep talking about Civil.
No,
but
it's the only one that's
yeah. So the tokens are a governance mechanism for the governance of the network. We talked about the Constitution and that being sort of a threshold for ethical journalism. It doesn't give you direct, and we're creating, and unfortunately I should have asked Mark to talk about it before he left, because he's building a tool on top of this open source network that will help drive attention and traffic and to Civil newsrooms. He's creating a tool for this, for example. But if any individual news organization has, say, a paywall or subscription model, your token doesn't get you access to that. What Civil does is trying to encourage everybody on the Civil network, and even people who don't hold tokens, to know that if a news organization is Civil, it could be trusted, and in that way to drive more and more attention towards those news organizations. Those news organizations can then either say, in order to read our content, you need to pay us, or please become a member, or what have you. And we encourage that. As we really just launched, as Civil becomes more and more robust, there will be tools coming online that will benefit news organizations. Microtipping was mentioned, and some others. In the meantime, the benefit for news organizations is, again, to be part of this community that we've been talking about, and to be part of this experiment. And we have some other sort of benefits for news organizations. We've negotiated group discounts to vendors that would be cheaper than an individual news organization might be able to get on their own. We're doing a lot of programming and educational materials, and giving them the token so it doesn't cost them anything to come online, and then making these monetization and these tools available, like this tool that is available now if you have WordPress, that allows you to publish your content to the blockchain. But Maria, you can jump in if you want.
I think a simplified way, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is if you buy a token, right? Let's say you buy 20 tokens. There are 10 newsrooms you like on Civil. You can choose to give that newsroom a token. And the newsroom then can monetize it. So that's on the newsroom side. The other thing is, what would the newsroom give you, right? The newsroom as a whole, so civil, this is what we're talking about. The civil community can take my newsroom in Manila, her newsroom in the United States, Colorado Sun is part of that, and actually weave us together in ways that we wouldn't be able to, and maybe make, so I say maybe because this is what we're in the process of creating, pull us together in a way that we would never be able to do in the real world. So it's connecting the monetization with the actual creation of the content and creating the entire system. Again, the simplest way that you can compare it to, Facebook obviously created a system. Twitter created a system. But there's no constitution. The rules aren't very clear, right? That's why it's so easy. This one is the other way. It's really hard. I mean, it's really hard. Creating each rule step by step so that all the rules are clear, and maybe that's part of that's the challenge, is how do we make it so it is as easy as, imagine all of the tech platforms have spent enough time making it so easy for you to click. How do we make this? And this is just a process of discovery, I think. But the key goal is to be able to make the internet safe. That's my goal.
That's a good one. All right, we're just about out of time, so if there's another quick question, we can take it. Otherwise, we can wrap things up. One more quick question.
Hi, Natalie Nogret from The Guardian. Thanks for helping me at least try to understand a little bit more about what sounds fascinating and very encouraging, but it is hard to understand. It is really hard to understand. I had one question which I hope won't sound geeky because I'm far from a geek, but I wanted to raise the question of one startup project which I heard about. It's in the US, and Mattias, we briefly spoke about this the other day. It's called Honeycomb, and it's also connected to blockchain. And when I heard about it, Vivian, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's about helping media organizations get money, get funding, but in ways that are connected to blockchain and where users allow the computer power of their smartphones, if I understood correctly, to be used by blockchain, and that's monetized, and then the coupons or the coins go to quality media organizations. Yeah. So it's not like it's not quite civil, but it's different. But I'd be curious to know whether you think that is anything realistic or promising. If you've heard of it.
Were you going to say something, Maria? Yeah, wait.
Experiment in progress, but as difficult, if not more difficult, than what civil is setting out to do. Because it's just like the cryptocurrency, right? You can take all your computers in the room and then have it be mining currency, and that's the same thing. That's the same thing they want to do. And again, you go back to what will the technology enable, and then how do we connect it to the news groups? How can we make money out of it and give value to consumers?
But go ahead.
Yeah, shortly, I don't really know Honeycomb more than that you just said, but I think the idea there is it's kind of a big idea from my point of view, is the distribution, the network, to take the network seriously, not take the network as something to be used from one point in the network, but the other way around. Each node of the network is the most important thing. To be it's slightly philosophical here.
But all these experiments will lead us to figure out what are the solutions that work. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank all of you. Hopefully you know a tiny bit more about blockchain you did before.